types of jobs that you're looking to target with your resume, because that will definitely adjust what information you bring forth in your resume process. So definitely take the time to kind of drop that in. So I don't know if you have a piece of paper in front of you along with that delicious adult beverage, but why don't you take a minute and write a quick note on some of the jobs that maybe you have in mind that you would like to target with your resume. I think it's a great resource. And then if you'd like to share those in the chat, please feel free to do so, so we can kind of get a sample of what people are looking to have covered. Perfect. Okay. So some of the common things that we take a look at is, a lot of times in the G&G space, it gets to be pretty tough when things are tighter on the energy space for energy markets. So in that decision-making cycle that you're looking at, one of the big things you might kind of consider is doing some deeper research. Energy is really, really broad. I think a lot of times we focus heavily in on strictly like upstream oil and gas and like, geologists doing exploration work, or whether it be development geology work or, field level work, really kind of, we get focused in a niche and we don't kind of take a broader kind of perspective on what we're looking for as far as opportunities out there. So when things are a little tight like they are now, I think it's really helpful to put a couple additional ideas on that list. That might be a little bit of a stretch. It might be different than what you originally had set out to do for your initial job search. So definitely make sure that you add those back in and then do the research on them. The next kind of stage is, it's kind of like an equation is like the best way to think about it, with the idea being for the types of jobs that we're looking at, make sure that you kind of go out and cruise. Look for those amazingly boring and dull job descriptions out there that people put together in human resources, right? That kind of list out all the job duties. Make sure you do a deep dive. Whitney and I are definitely here to kind of help tell a little bit of tips on how to look at those job descriptions. The big things on the job descriptions that you want to focus in on are not just the applicable skills, but also what problems the company is looking to have that job fulfill for them, solve for them. So for example, if it is an exploration geology role, maybe they're looking at bringing somebody in that has experience in exploration process, M&A work. Maybe they're going to be growing, kind of look for the problem sets that these people are going to need to hire you to fulfill for them. Because basically that's what a job is you basically are brought onto the team to serve as a resource to fulfill a need that team has on a problem that they are currently experiencing. And so really taking it from that lens rather than simply just the boring long list of skills that they hope you have. At this point in your careers, a lot of times the skill sets are going to be very comparable. It's really the underlying need that you want to make sure that you talk to. So definitely take a look at your skills. And then outside of just your traditional skill sets, so yes, you might have skills with like Petra or something like along those lines, right? With specific software programs, or, you might, I don't know, you might be really great at management, or you might have kind of additional kind of writing skills. Maybe you've done a lot of publication work. So it really kind of think very broad, put all your skills together on a page, right? And then dive down into kind of where your top 3 or your top 5 are. What really sets you personally apart, and highlight those. We want to make sure that no matter what job you are going after, those 3 to 5 key skills are really going to come off that page, and stand out. I think a lot of times we get so used to just doing laundry lists that we kind of, we bury our best assets in these like super long skills lists, right? Or we get intimidated because there might be a list of 10 and maybe we only have 8 of them or 7 of them. And so then we don't apply. Actually, statistically speaking, that's something that most women do. So we want to make sure that, we take all of these skills that we're thinking about, but really hone them in to meet that job specific needs and that exact problem that you're hoping to cover for that role. When you missing anything there?
Nope.
Cool. We're just gonna cruise kind of through it. So I know dorky diagrams, right? Everybody loves these. But basically what we want to do, is just to recap, is make sure that we kind of take the skills that we have and then look at the things that they need on their side. So really taking it from a lens that when you review that job description, it's not only what you can do, but what they need. Because that's really what you're talking to, is their need, not only about your background, right? Your background's wonderful, but it only is as valuable as you can display and that it meets their need. So kind of keep those kinds of things in mind. Cool.
Yeah.
Now, these are some of the tips and tricks. What, do you want to take this one?
Oh, sure. I was just going to jump on that real quick too. You know, and I can't kind of stress that enough in the resume building process, which is so often we kind of approach resumes from almost a peacock standpoint, right? You want to show off all of these amazing things that you've done, but ultimately, you know, the purpose of all of that plumage is to find a mate. So in this job plumage of resume that we're putting together, you know, it's important to remember the purpose, and that's always going to be from a hiring manager standpoint, that they have a problem that needs to be solved and they are looking for the person who can bring the solutions. So really trying to keep that in mind as you build your resume is huge. It is obviously important to highlight your accomplishments, and that's part of it, but it's more of a shift in your perspective in saying things that are, we always like to say, you know, that you can quantify and qualify your experience. So that is kind of the thing to keep in mind as you're going into building your resume. Mm-hmm. So moving on into kind of the tips and pointers section. Sorry, I've got so many windows going. I'm going to move that over here. In kind of the execution phase. So now you're actually starting to build the resume, or you have one that you're updating. A big thing, especially if you are trying to make a bit of a reach in the sense that you're applying for a job that might be in a company that's different than what you've worked in before, or you're looking to transition out of the industry or a different part of the industry that you've been in. One thing that is really helpful, especially to folks that are reviewing resumes, is to have a brief description of what the company is. One thing that we find, particularly in the energy space, is that we're all in it. So we like to think, you know, oh, if I say that, you know, I've worked for, you know, Devon Energy, people know the name. And so sometimes we forget that oftentimes it's twofold. If you're looking to move out of the sector or transition from one side of it to another, folks don't always know automatically the name recognition of the companies that you've worked at. Mm-hmm. Furthermore, oftentimes they're reviewing a high volume of resumes, and generally HR departments at that kind of sourcing and screening level, there's not a lot of specialization. So you might be having your resume reviewed by somebody who has worked for a software company or something like that. So the amount of specialization that you see in most facets of companies doesn't always apply to HR. So this is your way of giving them a little bit more information to work with in how, you know, they're going to view the subsequent information. So Emily is on it in the chat. That's exactly what we're talking about. So the example that's on the screen is, you know, if you've worked for, you know, Caliber or a midstream company, you would put the name of the company, the years that you worked there, and then you would put a little bit of a blurb just one sentence, very simple, of, you know, a description. So a privately held midstream company with assets in 4 states. If your company is very specialized to a specific geographic area, you can mention that. So, you know, if you have somebody who only focuses on Rockies assets, for example. So in the case of Emily's example, you know, for Halliburton, you could say a, you know, publicly held, you know, oil and gas service company. And you might even add a little bit of a caveat about what types of services. I know that, you know, with Hallie, their scope is pretty broad, but you can kind of dial that in and say, you know, in the whatever division you were in. So yeah, that's great.
And then,
Oh,
sorry. Go ahead,
go ahead,
Whitney.
Haley.
I was going to jump in and I don't need to jump in.
Yeah.
Along those lines, kind of thinking strategically back to what the problem is that the company is asking for. So asking for help on, they're not asking for the problem. I apologize. But you wanted to kind of keep the framing along those lines. So if it is, say, a new, you know, microseismic software company, right? And they're looking for a subject matter expert that has worked for a small operator before or a large operator and has seen the information on the other side of the desk, right? Make sure that you take that time and that real estate on your resume to put a little bit more detail in about that organization. So yes, you can put a very generic, like the example we have here, but say, you know, it was that microseismic, you know, software development group that you're going after, you might kind of put in a little bit more information about the types of services that you were a part of that might be in alignment with that, or the type of operator that you had worked with, just to kind of give them some perspective. So that when they're reviewing the work that you've done at the organization, there is a narrative that you have defined for them that works in your favor while they're reviewing that information. And so it does take up a little bit more real estate, but in all honesty, it's a really big bang for your buck.
I would agree. And Angelina, we'll track back to length a bit. That is one of the most common questions across the board is length, and we'll definitely address that.
Right.
But for the purpose of kind of adding these brief single line statements about the company, you know, we have seen that it tends to be, like Kaylee said, it tends to be a worthwhile use of the real estate that you do have on that. Great, Kaylee, you want to move us on?
I can. So one of the big things that we see is we'll see, you know, everybody's reviewed a job description. I think Emily even mentioned that the job description for her role wasn't well defined when she first, when she applied. And it really was kind of misdefined. A lot of the job descriptions will have job functions, so what they expect you to do on a daily basis. But really there's a step beyond that, right? There's a step that the reason they're asking you to do these things is because it's fulfilling the need that they have to solve a problem for them. So when you in turn write your resume, what you don't want it to look like is just a regurgitation of the job description that you performed on a daily basis. Yes, your daily activities are important, but what's even more important is the daily activity that you did that actually provided a valuable outcome to your employer, because that's what's going to make you stand out compared to the 100 other people that are going to be applying with a similar, sorry, I can't
There you
right
go.
now. Yeah, see, background. Exactly. So you want to make sure that you draw the full line around it. So for example, like, you know, explain what the company was doing in that stage. So maybe Halliburton was laying up a new service segment that was super specific to a specific region or a certain type of client that they were looking to target. And you were part of that team that developed that initiative for them. So make sure you put that in there instead of just saying developed new service. Explain why. Like they were hoping to target X, we were able to develop that in X number of months, it was a success. We had, you know, any kind of data or data tidbits that make it super sexy. We want to make sure that we add those in, right? Instead of just the bland kind of job description statement, which would be, you know, worked on a team to launch a new service set for Halliburton. It's not nearly as sexy as it could be. So we want to make sure we amp it up and use that real estate effectively. Anything else on that, Whit?
No, I think that's great. And one thing I will mention as well, guys, is we'll send a link to that sample resume, and that will provide, if you download that, you know, that'll kind of give you a consolidated version of everything we're talking about today. So even if you don't use it as a template, it can be really helpful to see how these things all play together in action in a single resume after the fact. So if you're curious about seeing what that looks like, not on a presentation slide, but in an actual resume, that's a good place to go to see how these things are being used.
Yeah, and layering on the last slide. So if you are defining the full narrative, which is what we're hoping you're going to do, about a problem and how you solve the problem for the company or part of the solution, you also need to define your role within that team. So I think a lot of people forget that teams are structured super differently between organizations, and heck, even between regions on some of these larger groups, right? So even though your titling might be a team lead might have a different kind of structure behind it in, you know, Noble Energy versus, you know, Oxy or Anadarko or something along those lines. So you have to be really cognizant of the fact that the team that you define helps with the narrative. So in the example, like we've got here on the screen, you know, you worked closely with a team of 3 engineers reporting to da 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 da. You know, make sure you put that information in to the resume. It shows the scope of your reach. It shows your ability to work on a team. And also probably if you were in a lead role or a management position, will identify the scope of your management skills, or at least allude to it. So we want to make sure we include those.
Yep.
All right. Moving us along, kind of along the same lines, scope, size, timeline, you know, details, make it, these things are like super sexy. You definitely want to make sure you put them in there, you know. It's a missed opportunity a lot of the time that people don't get to utilize. So we think of it as like a project list thing. So if you want to think back to your key projects that you've worked on and the metrics on those projects, those are great things to include into your resume for a little bit more substance like this, okay? So like not just say, you know, you completed a pipeline, talk about the size and scope of the pipeline. What kind of product were you guys moving? You know, things along those lines that are really, really key in helping understand your context of your skill set. Okay, and then the last kind of thing, bring it full circle, is you'll kind of do a full overview of the whole process, right? So rather than just the transactional item of, you know, launching a new service set for Halliburton like we used earlier, walk through the entirety of that project, maybe in a 2 to 3 sentence framework, right? Using metrics and details and things along those lines. So make it into almost a storyline. So that way the reviewer can really kind of understand where you're coming from, and it doesn't leave a lot to their imagination. It helps you actually to stoke their imagination on how you could do something similar and bring the skill sets to their company from where you just were, or where you were 2 steps ago, or something along those lines. Okay. And then big thing a lot of people forget is state the wins. So we like to identify it as like a key project list or key wins. So we'll want to make sure that you want to have like a handful of key wins. Maybe it's 2 wins per company, right? That makes sense, that go in alignment with the type of job that you're applying to. So if you're in a business development capacity, you know, having some great metrics on wins, that big projects that you've won, large scale bids, mergers that you've worked on, things along those lines are very valuable wins to have listed. And you want to make sure you draw those out. So don't miss out on that opportunity to kind of do a little bit of an ego share. I know it's kind of weird to talk about yourself and about your wins, but it definitely is, it's definitely a valuable item. Perfect. So kind of bringing the whole thing together, and you guys will see this model that I'm sharing on the screen. You guys will see this also in the resume template and some other examples that we have on our website too. So don't worry too much about getting into the weeds on this, but this will give you an example of kind of why this is a really strong format for a resume. Is it's very specific. It identifies wins. It talks through the experience in a narrative format. And really highlights how you solve problems, how this individual solves problems for the company, right? So definitely making sure that you put in some detail is really key here. And not, you notice how it doesn't look like a job description, for lack of better ways to say it. Oh, Whitney, can you share the website? That would be wonderful.
Yeah, I'm on it.
Perfect, thank you. Perfect. So just final slide here, and then we'll move into kind of more of the Q&A side of it. We've got some no-nos that Whitney and I like to call them. And so there's a couple. With most of the processes now for submissions, unfortunately, where we stand as an industry is that, and this is across multiple industries, there's going to be a higher volume of applicants for each one of the roles out there, right? And it's an unfortunate stage that we are in. With that in mind, a lot of the companies are running with leaner HR teams, if they even have an HR team internally. So you might have the hiring managers themselves reviewing the information. Typically, most of them will use an applicant tracking system, which is basically that lovely thing that you get to refill out all those data points and all of that kind of stuff, the miserably difficult part of applying, such as Taleo and all of that kind of stuff, right? So with those applicant tracking systems, I know you guys had a session last week, I think, about applicant tracking system key points on resumes. And so some of this might be similar. So I'll be pretty quick on it. With those applicant tracking systems, it is really difficult to have a super fancy resume with all the design and details and like tons of photos and things like that. So try to keep it pretty simple and basic and to the point and easy to read. So be careful with crazy fonts and things along those lines. And definitely don't use first person. It's a huge no-no. So make sure you have somebody else go back in and review it, and then watch your tenses as well. A lot of times people will add a new bracket of their most recent experience and not change their past experience from present to past tense. So it can be a little bit awkward for the reader. So you don't want them to think that you don't have that attention to detail. So make sure you go back and look at the tense as well. Anything else I'm missing, Whit?
Yeah, and then I think this is a great time to address the length question. As you can see, we have novels at the bottom. Again, this is something that we hear constantly, and it's something we struggle with ourselves as well. We had to put together some, resumes to get our small woman-owned small business designation, and we were doing the exact same thing. So it's a common question. Effectively, when it comes to length, there has been a myth out there for a long time that everything has to be on one page. There are different schools of thought when it comes to that. We personally think that it's really difficult if you have, more than 2 jobs to fit everything on one page. And what we find is that a lot of times people, in their quest to fit everything on one page, will omit information that potentially is the thing that could be getting them into the interview stage for fear of length. Conversely, there are, in some situations where if somebody has a great deal of experience, we work with a lot of folks who are moving into the consulting world after being in the industry for 25, 30 years. Their resumes run on the high side of, they'll come to us with 10-page resumes. So, there's not really a singular, what?
I said, which we pare down because 10 pages is too much.
Yeah. So there's not really a singular formula as to how long it should or shouldn't be. The biggest thing is to make sure that for each position you've held, you are kind of doing all of the things that we just talked about. You are showcasing how you engaged in your role, the scope of your responsibilities, you're quantifying and qualifying the impact that you had, and how you solve that problem. And so, you know, ultimately, we suggest kind of using your best judgment. But what we typically see is that if you are someone who is early stage career, maybe you've got that kind of 3 to 5 years of experience, you know, that's kind of 1 page, 1.5, you know, and then as you get into that 5 to 10 year range, you're looking at kind of that 2.5 kind of realm. And then above that, you know, obviously getting into the 3-page realm. Typically, we don't suggest more than 3 pages. One place where that gets a little bit different is if you have done a lot of publications, and you want to include those publications. A lot of times folks who have done a lot of publishing will end up with, you know, a half a page of articles that have been published and things like that. Typically what we counsel them to do is, you know, if it's not specifically pertinent to the role they're applying to, it's more of kind of an added bonus, right? There's, you know, some creative strategies you can work with on that, which is you can include a link to your LinkedIn profile where you have all of your publications listed out. That's a great option. You should have a link to your LinkedIn profile on your resume regardless. That is a very common thing nowadays to have people check in tandem. Often applicant tracking systems pull in your LinkedIn resume or your LinkedIn profile at the same time as your resume. So oftentimes people who are reviewing resumes are looking at both at the same time. So as much work as you're going to put into your resume, make sure you take that same amount of work and put it into your LinkedIn profile. You don't want to put all this effort in and create it in a vacuum, particularly because now there is a good body of research that says, you know, 70% of jobs are now filled by networking. So having a solid resume and using that as the basis for a solid LinkedIn profile is really key. So hopefully that answers your question a little bit on the length thing. Use your best judgment. And again, like Kaylee had mentioned earlier, don't create your resume in a vacuum. Show it to people, you know, get feedback from friends and family, talk to people who are in industry and also those who aren't, because they will have different perspectives and can provide good, you know, helpful advice. And you always get that resume blindness. So it's great to have somebody who can look at it again, you know, so you can avoid those things that maybe should spell check, but don't. So.
Perfect. Thanks, Whit. So I actually think we're done with the presentation side. If we want to start breaking out into our breakout groups, real quick before that, I think Whitney shared the actual link in the chat. I don't have it open right now, but I think that's the case. And then if you have any other follow-up questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to us directly. You know, you can find us easily on LinkedIn. We're not shy about connecting, and we'll definitely point you in the right direction or answer questions that you guys might have too. So if you're not joining us with the breakout session, that also is another resource for you as well.
Okay, great. Awesome. And sorry, kid. So that was a great presentation. We're going to go into breakout rooms now. So I'm going to go ahead and get everyone situated there. So we're going to recreate this and should be interesting. We're going to do.
And are we going to circle back at 6 just so I can keep an eye on it?
Yes.
Okay.
At 6. Well, right now it's like 5:40 your time, right?
Yes. Oh, sorry. Forget people are in different time zones.
5:40 Central. So I think we're going to give 30 minutes, or do you want to do, so maybe 6:10?
Sure. Great.
Okay. All right. And so I will contact you guys before just to see how you guys are doing. All right. Okay, great. I'm going to go ahead and recreate all these rooms. And I'm going to, Kaylee will be in one room and Whitney is going to be in the other room, and they will be leading the session, so you can ask all your questions there. All right.
Yeah. Hit us. Join.
Oh gosh.
Has to do with gaps in your resume. And so it sounded like you had maybe through an outplacement worked with some resume advisors who said to remove that. Is that right?
Yeah, Hal had given us right management, membership for a month, and they edited the resume or my resume, and they said the main thing was they took out that gap, and I was always told to like have an explanation as to why there was a gap, and I'm like, which do I do?
Yeah,
because I'd always been told the opposite.
absolutely.
To have an explanation.
Yeah, and again, I hate, like, this is one of the hardest parts about doing the resume stuff, and I apologize, is because it's just so, there's some things work for some people and not for others. Typically what we have people do is leave it in and just have a very short line about it. One sentence with the time frame. I always err on the side of doing that rather than not, in the sense that in many states, if there is a gap in employment, it is not lawful to ask somebody about why they have a gap in their resume. So by providing that, you're basically helping any screener or HR person, sourcer, to fill in that blank without putting themselves in a position where they have to guess. And you never want somebody to guess where you've been for 6 years, right?
Like, were you in jail for 6 years? It's like, no, I was doing, trying to figure it out. But then in interviews, I make it clear that I finished grad school, and I also have special needs kids, so I also had to figure that out, and once we figured that out, I was able to start working again. So once I tell them that, they're like, oh, okay, she can be a full-time, worker person. Yeah. At least Hal was okay with it.
Totally. And it's very common, lately, there's been a lot of dialogue around women in particular taking care of aging parents and needing to take time off or have different flexible schedules for things like that, as well as, for childcare. So whatever the reason is, typically I err on the side of leaving it in. So
okay.
Great question. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Does anybody have other questions?
When putting your time that you've been at a company, would you put year to year or month year to month year?
Great question.
How specific?
I always say month year. The doing just the year can be pretty it leaves a lot of room for interpretation, right? A lot of things can happen in a year, but furthermore, if you're looking at any type of role, especially in energy, one thing is folks who've been in energy for a while can tell you a little bit about, when you see somebody who, in the first part of 2015 changes jobs, it's likely a layoff because that was a difficult time. So I think putting the month with it helps people to understand a little bit more as far as potential reasons. And if you're looking at something that's like an M&A situation and there was a sale, or it's related to quarters and financial closing of like financial years or budgets and things like that, it just helps. So I definitely do the month year combination.
I have a question.
Sure.
How far do you actually have to go on your resume? Like, for example, Unfortunately, I've been one of those people that was laid off in 2015 and unfortunately again last year. So I have actually, I finished my PhD in 2013, but I have
putting me in them.
Well, that's a benefit. That means they thought that you could learn things quickly on your feet and you could adapt to new teams. So there's some really good selling points that come out of that from a professional standpoint. So I would definitely say I would frame the narrative on it to highlight the fact that you did have this exposure to these different teams and define the teams themselves. So even under each one of those teams, define it a little bit more. So how large was the well site team? Who did it report to? Kind of give them the context to show that you really did make those moves and learn from each one of the groups that you were part of.
Okay,
and
thank you.
Yeah, of course. And don't forget the wins at those groups. So you might, so don't forget all the sexy juice that you need to put in there about each one of those wins.
All right.
For sure. So hopefully that answers the question a little bit on it. Cool. Anybody else have a question? Thanks, James, for speaking up on that.
I have a question.
Perfect, Corey, go for it.
So I have about 15 years of experience, well, about 17 years actually. And I feel it's all pretty pertinent to the positions that I apply to, because some of it is like a specialized software program that I started my career in. It's called Petrel. I started with the company that developed the software and wrote the code for it. And then I've used it throughout the remaining or 15 years of my career or so. On my CV, in my resume, how many years back can I go? I've been told to maybe cut it to 10 years and don't go back further beyond that. But then I've actually worked with recruiters who said, you're missing a lot of valuable information of your first 5 years of your career. So right now my resume is about 2.5 pages long. So I'm like on the 3-page mark. I'm trying to find the line between how much is too much and how much is too little, really.
This is a great question. Like, you are definitely not alone in this debate, right? So Corey, tell me about the types of roles that you're looking for.
So I'm looking for primarily development geologist positions.
Okay.
I've spent the last 15 years with one company, and I've worked in mostly offshore field development, mostly conventional assets. Like I have some unconventionals, but the most of my experience has been conventional, offshore oil and gas, and I have a very heavy emphasis on petroleum geomodeling. And that really is the type of job or project I'm looking to work on.
Are you looking, so are you mainly looking kind of larger majors that, have more of the conventional plays on that? Are you looking at software companies? Are you looking at, consulting for those types of organizations, or maybe some of like the, there's a lot of groups out there that are like consulting entities. Like, for example, like Sproul is a great example. They have a ton of clients that are kind of in that ballpark, and they offer those types of services. So having somebody with an SME like you would be helpful for that type of environment. I don't know if I just made things way more difficult for you or not.
Well, so far I've focused on mostly like major companies that have, big, projects overseas and things like that. But I'm starting to, consider looking at like software companies that have specialization geomodeling packages and things where I could do like business development for certain geoscience type softwares, because I started my career doing that. So really, I'm looking, right now I'm looking into everything, anything that I see that I would be qualified for, I'm looking to apply. Yeah,
so I think one of the big things, so the suggestions that a lot of like outplacement firms do is that they want you to have like a very truncated resume. And I think it works great from from an old school human resources perspective. One of the problems with it, though, in how we currently work in human resources in the industry is we're not just trying to get you in front of the HR person. The end goal is to have your background be entirely appealing to the hiring manager. As long as you get past the gatekeeper, most of your HR people are not, they probably wouldn't even understand the differences between petrol and Petra, right? And the differences between conventional and unconventional modeling. And they're not going to know the depth on it, right? So we want your resume, when it sits on that desk of that hiring manager, right, and it finally gets to them, We want them to be like, holy shit, this is exactly who I need to talk to, you know? And so with that, it's really hard to truncate the first 5 years of your experience, especially since it was so pivotal in your formation of understanding how the software was developed, right? Like with Petrol, and, you know, understanding how, you know, kind of the full life cycle of your career. I think it would probably be a disservice to you, especially looking at the types of companies you're looking at, to get rid of it. I would include it and fill up the last bit of that, like 3 pages, maybe 3 pages and some change if it's got really good stuff that you think would set you apart from the pack on it. So I wouldn't cut it short.
Okay.
So I know
and that's the route that I've taken so far. I've kind of, yeah, I put more detail than less. I just hope that, you know, the HR filters don't see it and they're like, oh, too wordy, and just get rid of it. So we'll see.
Well, so one of the big things is thinking how HR works. And I don't know, has anybody here worked directly with HR before? Raise your hand. Has anybody okay, James, perfect. Has anybody been the hiring manager before and interviewed people? Okay, so kind of thinking about how HR functions and getting to know them is critical, and kind of looking at your perspective on how you put yourself out there. HR tends to be very like volume based, right? So what they're really doing is a very brief overview. They're querying like with keywords, and then they're putting you into a bucket, and then they're like reviewing it really quickly, right? With the more words that you have on your resume, you are going to be seen in more of those keyword filtration systems, right? And so you're going to automatically come higher into the top and float higher up, right? And then what ends up happening is they batch like 20 to 50 resumes to the hiring manager, and the hiring manager is the person that then looks through those, right? Or maybe it's 10 if you have a really great sourcer, you know? And so the additional detail actually helps you rise higher into the applicant tracking system process and lets you be there longer. So the original kind of concept of only having a 1 or 2 page resume was really more from the human resource manager back in the day, because they're like, oh my God, I can't read hundreds of these resumes. Well, they're not reading them at the current moment with the volume of applicants. So if you already know that, then play towards the hiring manager, the end result that you're trying to get. You will automatically come in well with the applicant tracking system.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, so I hope that helps. Anybody else have a question?
I have a question.
Yeah, go for it, Matt.
I know you made some interesting comments we were talking before about, like, for example, stoking imagination. When I look at my resume, and a lot of resumes that I've seen, they're very bland, but they're not as, you know, just maybe based on our backgrounds, we may not be as creative or have that stint in mind of having an imaginative or a compelling document to read. What guidelines would you have around that, as far as
that's a great question.
Bringing it to life.
Yeah, right. How do you make it a living document instead of something that puts you to sleep, right, when you're looking at it? Because you're already struggling, right, when you're writing this up. It sucks. So I'm never going to sugarcoat it. Resume writing is totally terrible. It's a terrible process to go through. One of the big tools that we use in our private coaching, we kind of do 2 different things. A lot of times when we work with our clients on getting their resumes kind of rocking and rolling and making them sexy and kind of more compelling, is to first have them sit down and not even touch the resume, right? We have a project document that we have you guys fill out, right? Where it's like, I want you to think back through all of the key projects that you've worked on over the course of your career, right? And I know it sounds really dorky and like worksheety and, you know, just like usually not fun, but we say, okay, so tell me about the project, tell me about the company itself. So tell me the story about what was going on with the company at that point in time. And then tell me, you know, what you did, what the process was, and what the outcomes were, right? And so in that, it kind of gets rid of the anxiety of trying to make it sound perfect, right? And instead, it allows you to kind of open up and see, kind of what the full life cycle of that project looks like and whether or not it gets a thumbs up and goes on your resume or thumbs down. So sometimes people think that you can only, when we say wins, you can only put projects that were entirely successful. And in geoscience, a lot of times you guys are looking at projects that might not have been successful, right? You're helping curate, where does the company go next? You know, what's a valuable asset? What's a valuable resource in general? And so a lot of times, you know, showcasing looked at, you know, or reviewed is a project that was found to be not a profit center for us, that we then divested because it didn't fit with our portfolio or it didn't have good development capabilities. And that's a thing that the companies that your companies are looking for, right? They're looking for not only the big wins that you had, but also the ability that you have to say, yeah, this shit is not gonna ride. We're not gonna move forward on this based off of kind of the experience. So that's the first step, is looking at it from a project list and then highlighting the things that you want to pull from that project list to put into your resume. And the cool thing about doing it that way is you actually have all of those sexy facts and details because you just wrote it out as a normal kind of narrative, right? And you can kind of finesse it a little bit and put it back into your resume. It's way less stressful if you do something along those lines than trying to sit in front of your screen and say, okay, I know I did X, but how do I describe it in a way that's intriguing, right? It's kind of like, think about the project list as a way for you, if you were at a bar and you were telling, well, maybe not everybody goes to bars the way I like to go to bars, which I'm really missing right now.
We used to go to bars.
I'm missing a bar. I'm missing a beer and a porch somewhere, you know, like a patio here in Colorado. Anyways, I know, right? Everybody's missing that. So one of the big things is how you would describe the project. Like if you're just, you know, shooting it with somebody at the bar and describing your project, you're going to describe it in really flattering details, right? Or not so flattering details, depending on how well the project went or didn't go. And it's a real story. It's intriguing. It's interesting. That's what you want to put on your resume and not just the transactional items of it. So you can say something like, you know, like you can add color to it is the best way to kind of think about it. So that would be my first suggestion, would be to start from an actual like project list. Then my second suggestion would be to write a separate document where it's literally a narrative of the stories for those projects. The reason this is helpful is because remember, your resume is your very first calling card to get in there for the conversation with the hiring manager. And if you walk in the door with your resume, as well as this project list, you know, handy for you, when they ask you those terrible HR questions, right? Tell me about a challenge that you overcame in your last role. You're like, I sure as shit have one. Let me tell you. And you can look at your project list, glance down and be like, let me tell you about this. We did, you know, we went out and bought this asset and we thought we were going to do great. And we crashed, we burned, but we worked on it for 6 months and this is what ended up happening. You know, it doesn't always have to be the best of the best for what you provide. So Matt, does that kind of help you a little bit? So maybe don't think about it just doing it in the resume format. Think about it as like an offline thing that you then pull back into it. And then kind of going along that real fast, the nice thing about the project thing is twofold. So going back to kind of Corey's example earlier, where he's looking at like 2 different types of jobs, right? One example he suggested was like a business development manager for like a software organization, right? Where he could bring some of his, you know, background to the table in that fashion versus like a development geology role, right? So if those are 2 different kind of roles to gear towards. If you have a project list, you can say, I'm going to highlight project A for my development job, and I'm going to highlight project C for my business development side of it. So my 2 resumes now have very coherent items that talk directly to the overall outcome that I'm looking to get to. So it's a great way to kind of help it make it a little bit easier on writing those different versions for the different companies that you're applying for. Anybody else have a question?
Yeah, if no one else does, I can always come up with another one.
Go ahead.
So with, you know, quarantine and everything, I've been taking a lot of like online classes to build skills that I didn't have that were tangentially related to my job, like programming or things like that. But I don't have any work experience. Is there a way to integrate those into the resume to say I have these even though they don't appear in any jobs? Or do I just need to like wait until I'm in the room with someone and be like, oh, also I know how to program in Python and Java and SQL?
Those are really valuable skill sets to have. I would hate for you to miss out getting a conversation or getting invited to the room for the conversation by not identifying those in your resume. So what you can do is you can say newly acquired skills or newly acquired kind of certs, if you get certs from it, whatever it might be, to showcase the fact that you just received these and you're looking to deploy them in a new role, in a new opportunity. So definitely kind of
point, and it's a little bit easier on LinkedIn too, because a lot of times you can just click on the company and learn a little bit about them. From the networking approach standpoint, even though we're not getting that human interaction right now that most of us really enjoy, as much fun as it is to sit in my Lincoln log cabin and drink my cider, I'd rather be meeting you fine folk in person. So I think, having an approach of, you can even preface it because it's an awkward situation that everybody's in. So if you see somebody who's working at a company that you're curious about or interested in, or you haven't connected with in a while, totally fine to send them a message and say, hey, I know it's a strange time out there. I was looking at your company. They're doing interesting things. I'd love to learn more about it. How do you like working there? If you take more of that conversational approach, other than, hey, is your company hiring? Everybody's getting those LinkedIn messages right now. They're so uncomfortable because then you don't want to like respond. It's like, oh, I don't know, like check the job board. Don't put me in the middle of this. But if you approach it from the, do you like it there? Are you guys doing cool stuff? I think that is a useful thing. And more what people mean when they say networking, because that's genuine. Just like blasting everybody in your network. Hey, I need a job. Boy, especially at this time, it's like, yeah, we all kind of do, dude. So hopefully that's a little bit helpful. But I think that, that's the right idea of kind of thinking a little bit more strategically about how you can, go down the rabbit hole and find different ones. And if you use OneNote or bookmarks, that's a great way to keep yourself up to date. You can also, a lot of companies that have job boards have an RSS feed. So you can pull a feed of companies you like. Oftentimes the jobs that you're seeing on the Indeed, the Monster, the LinkedIn, those big boards, most of those are pay to play. So a benefit of using that approach and pulling your own RSS feed together using Google, OneNote, Evernote, whatever it is that you're going to get notified sooner. Most of those websites that are aggregators crawl on a weekly basis. So you're not always seeing the postings as quick as you should be. And with as many people are in the market right now, time is of the essence. So I highly recommend doing that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else? I feel like I'm just talking up a storm.
How would we add new skills that we've acquired since the pandemic? Like I've been watching a bunch of webinars about Python and SAP and things like that. How would we put that on our resume?
Yeah, that's a great question. So oftentimes, especially if they're software specific, you can add towards the bottom, usually kind of in the same neighborhood that you're going to have your associations and your education. Drop a little thing under your education that says continuing education. List the name of the courses and when you did them. That kind of continue learning. The hip HR word right now is upskilling. So if you hear people talk about upskilling, that's what they're talking about. I don't know who decided this or why, but so that's a great place to put that, especially if you are going out of your way to keep fresh and acquire these skills. I think that's a huge thing to highlight right now, because as much as we all love Tiger King, it's a little bit useful to add some substance into that too. Oh, Jennifer, I think you're muted.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Like my boyfriend just went to the kitchen and he asked me something. So
no, it's fine. I thought you were asking a question. Is dinner ready yet?
That he just answered basically.
Nice.
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. Does anybody else have other questions?
Yes, I have one. I'm
Sure.
sorry. And he just on my current resume, like I have to download your template and reformulate things again. I have one section that it was like the verse that you mentioned during the webinar, that it was like, I have worked with X types of companies done, like it was like the big scale. So that's the first thing. And then there is kind of like a section when I list all the different areas that I actually have some sort of skill. So like there is a software line all listed.
Yeah.
Areas in the world where you have worked on all listed. And things like that. You just mentioned that you should put those at the end, but I have them at the beginning. So how do I know when to put them up or down?
You know, typically what I would say is when you're a couple years into your career, any of that additional skill set, whether that's listing your softwares, that's your publications, that's, you know, geographic areas, things like that, you know, after you hit a certain point of being, you know, in the industry or in, you know, the professional world for a few years, people are more attuned to looking at your job title and how long you've been there. That's kind of how the recruiter brain works. So if you kind of think about it as a, you know, as a layer cake, you know, you're gonna build all your layers of the actual substance. So that is what we talked about, what you've done, the scope, the size, the title, the company, and then all of the other stuff is icing on the cake. And more often than not, those are great for getting pulled into keyword searches when people are searching their own databases or their applicant tracking systems. Most of those are going to pull in regardless. So the actual location of the keyword isn't as critical for somebody who's looking at resumes in the back end of an applicant tracking system, because they're still going to pull into that general search. So once you're into that general search, if they're searching on Python or any other software, you know, you want to be able to show them right up front, here's the meat and potatoes of my experience, and then kind of add to it. Hopefully that it makes sense.
Yes, it does.
Yeah. One thing I will add on that too, if you guys go to our website and you check out some of our videos, we answer a couple questions like this. But one thing that we haven't really addressed, and we have a video about that I think is really important in that granddaddy one, is your objective or your summary statement. That is one of those things where some, you know, outplacement agencies love them, other people hate them. You know, it's kind of up to you how you want to use that space. But we find that really helps set the tone. It's almost a 2-line mini cover letter. Here's what you're about to see. Here's what I'm about. So I would definitely recommend checking out those videos. And that also plays into the personal messaging. So we do a lot of coaching work with folks on kind of their personal messaging. So that carries through the entire job, you know, search process. A lot of times that personal message that we help them craft shows up at the beginning in their summary statement. That's also the personal messaging that they're using when they're doing their LinkedIn networking and outreach. That's also
the data side for you. And so informational conversations, going to networking events, doing virtual stuff like James is saying, those will open up doors for you way faster than the applying for the entry-level position, because most jobs are actually found through networking, especially at this stage in your career. So they'll be more open because you're going to have an actual connection to you, and you're going to be talking about your past experience way more so than just reviewing your resume on a entry-level data, you know, job posting. So Matt, does that kind of explain your answer? So you are accurate, but there are ways to kind of go around the system.
Around it.
I think we're ready to go back to the main room if you'd like. Sorry, I was trying to wrap up real fast. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Give us some time. I think people are kind of wrapping up in the other room.
So I have a question, Kaylee, since you guys work with clients, what are you hearing from them about hiring? You know, a lot of companies I've talked to are just put things on hold for a while. Are you seeing more companies looking at going back to hiring? Or what do you
Yeah, it's a great question. So a lot of the stuff that we had at the very beginning of the year definitely got put on hold, both due to pricing of oil and gas as well as COVID, right? It's been, unfortunately, everybody's been in like this purgatory, right? Both the people looking and the people looking to hire. So we've had a lot of people that have had delayed starts on stuff. We've seen a lot of people say, you know, look, we're going to have to shelf this until Q3. But we are now starting to get 3 months. I think people, you know, they've kind of waited as long as they can on certain needs, and or the reverse, which is a terrible reverse. They laid off too many people and the work is still necessary to get completed. So now they've got to look at hiring people back either on a contract basis or on a permanent hire basis. So having some flexibility on looking at opportunities that could also be perm as well as contract would be something that I would definitely make sure you keep those doors open if that's available to you personally, to do that. So I think you're going to see a little bit more activity coming back. The third item is a lot of teams that got hit hard. First ones were HR. So a lot of times, like, you're going to see people repost jobs again because their HR teams weren't present and are no longer on board. So it's going to kind of the buck is going to get past the hiring managers to kind of redo the search. So you're going to see things come up again. And if you do reapply, so that you get back to the top of the queue. So those are some of the things that you're going to start to see, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. I hope everyone found that useful and that they got to meet some really cool people in your breakout rooms and ask some. I heard some great questions. It's hard to leave the rooms because there's so many great questions from in each room. So I think this was really, really helpful. I personally have used Kaylee and Whitney's personal coaching in April. That's kind of why I brought them on, was because I was at a point where personally I saw all the job postings like disappear and I was a little freaked out. And so I contacted Kaylee, who I heard on Crude Audacity, which is a podcast, and I reached out to her and to their Iridium Recruiting because they have so much experience. So I really wanted to introduce them to all the other geos, just so that you guys can kind of have some resources, and especially with their amount of experience. So I really appreciate you guys. Sorry I couldn't introduce you properly originally. My son was kind of, this is his time where he's like, I want to play with mom and dad. So I was like, oh no. But yeah, so on that topic, we have some really great seminars coming up. Again, it's to the G&G community. And so next week we will have a seminar on LinkedIn and using the LinkedIn recruiter tool, and Melanie will be on there, and she will actually go on your profile and see what your LinkedIn is like using the LinkedIn recruiter tool. So that will be a fun thing to attend if you want to see if your LinkedIn is up to snuff when it comes to recruiters, especially since they're going to be relying on it more. And we also have we will have a coping with unemployment. I know it's tough. It was tough for me. And so we will have Adam, who is a mental health expert, also joining us in July. And that will be followed up with how to network. And so we are lining up all the speaker sessions. We'll have Iridium Recruiting back again. And so, and which we're going to flesh out all the details there, but it should be an exciting time. And I'm trying to get this all in before school starts again. And, you know, kids are, you know, who knows what's going to happen in the school system, but so that way everyone has kind of the tools they need. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to Whitney and Kaylee. They're really responsive and really great. And I hope you guys found this useful. And I hope to see you guys on the LinkedIn recruiting session next Monday.
Thanks for having us, and thank you for being so talkative, everyone. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. My pleasure. Thank you so much.
One more thing. If you have found this useful, please share this with your network. The more people that know about it, about the free, you know, these services that we're offering through everyone, all these speakers are coming, please share it and subscribe on G&G Forum. I don't know. That's what they say, right? Okay. So anyway, sorry. Thank you and have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.